Hey everybody, Milton Davis here. It is 8 o'clock, and as promised, I am here to discuss what was I thinking. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about my very first novel, Meji. Um, Meji came about in a number of different ways. Matter of fact, let me show you. This is actually the very first edition of Meji. This is how it came out when it was first printed. Cover art by my cousin Thomas Davis, and just the cover design, everything like that. But a lot of times when I'm online and in conversations, I'm talking to different authors and some starting authors, and we're talking about how story ideals came to be and how we develop things. So I decided I wanted to do a series of videos on particular books in my collection and talk about how they came to be. And the first book I wrote, the first novel I wrote, was Meji, and just wanted to give you an idea of how that, a timeline of how that story came to be. The first idea of Meji started actually in the 1990s. I was doing a lot of research on African culture and history, and the more research I did, the more excited I got about actually writing a story. And I was really set off when I bought Segu by Maurice Condé, because it basically gave me an example of what could be done by using African history and culture as the backdrop for a novel. In her case, it was a historical fiction novel, but I wanted to do something that was going to be more on the fantastic side. The first main character of Meji, who is Indoro, actually was based on Zulu culture, and that was because basically at the time, that was the culture that I was able to find the most information on. I was able to find a lot of books. Of course, I was a big fan of Shaka Zulu at the time, and so I said I want to write a story that's going to be based on the culture. And I sat down and started working on the story. And as I started making progress, I looked at the story. I was like, you know what? It's almost like I'm writing Shaka Zulu all over again. And nobody wants to read that. I mean, I don't even want to read that. So for a while, I set the story aside. And as I started doing more research, I started learning more about different cultures. I started learning about Yoruba culture, about Ashanti culture, about Swahili culture, just different cultures on the continent. And I really got excited, and I said, I want to write something that is going to show the diversity of the cultures on the African continent, and something that would bring these cultures into the ones I wanted to work with into close proximity of each other, so I could show the interaction between those cultures and stuff. And that's where the real seed of Meji started. Some of you might be familiar with the title of the book, Meji. It's a Yoruba word that means two. And in this case, it was related to the Abeji belief among Yoruba people. From what I've heard, Yoruba have the largest number of twin births than any other culture in Africa, and they are celebrated. And so, but I also found other cultures where the birth of twins could cause some issues. So I started thinking about a concept where maybe you have two people marrying from different cultures, and that this would cause a difficulty between the husband and the wife, depending on which culture they represented, because of how they would handle that type of birth. Let me stop for 1 minute before I go on any further. If you have read Meji and you want to know a little bit more insight about what's going on, this is a great thing. This is a great book to have, a great conversation to be in. If you have not read Meji, then I must warn you, there will be spoilers throughout this talk. So you may end up finding out some things that you may not want to find out if you're planning on reading the book, or you may not be planning on reading the book and say, "Look, I just want to hear what the book's about." So this is a good conversation for you to be in. That way, you don't have to worry about reading it. But just want to give you that little warning before I go on any further. So I talked about wanting to work within different cultures and show the interaction between different cultures. I talked about the fact how the concept of working with twins and the different ways twins were treated in different cultures, added some interesting had an interesting situation to the story. And then there was another concept that I was coming across when I was reading and doing some research on different cultures. And one of the things about a lot of African cultures is that the leader of a particular culture, a chief or a king, is in that position because they are the closest to the ancestors. They have the closest spiritual connection with the ancestors, and part of them being in that position, they're basically, in most cases, they're selected by elders who have determined that this person from this particular family has the closest connection and the strongest spiritual bond to be able to lead the culture and do well for them. And everything that they do has to be in the benefit of the culture. If it gets to the point where bad things start happening in the culture, then it's looked on as a sign is that this person is no longer favored by the ancestors. And in that case, the elders will get together and remove that person from leadership. And so I was thinking about that. And I was thinking about also the fact that when you are a leader, you have to work. You have to work on a secular aspect as well as a spiritual aspect. And I was thinking about, well, if you are a person, sometimes you may be stronger spiritually, or sometimes you may lean more toward a secular point of view. And I was thinking, if you wanted to be a perfect leader, you would have to have equal amount of expertise and knowledge in both of those areas. But what if, in the course of a lifetime, a person was not able to gain the proper experience and really be familiar or adept at either one? So that led me down another path, and I started thinking. I said, well, how would a person be able to live a lifetime and be able to become adept at both? And I started thinking about it, and I started thinking about the fact of twins, and I said, well, what if that person was basically born as two people? And that was the thing that really set off the whole conversation. That this person was born as two people, and that is the whole concept behind the saying that I say in Meji, two must become one. And so basically, and this is a big spoiler for people who haven't read the book yet, basically the reason that Endoro and Obaseki were born as twins, because each of them had a path to lead. In Endoro's case, he was the warrior. He was the secular leader. And his lifetime was going to be spent becoming adept at that and becoming a master of that. Whereas in Obaseki's case, he was the spiritual side. His life, from as far as he could remember, had been he had been surrounded with spirits and having this particular connection with spirits. And that's why when we get further into the book, that Obaseki is the first one to realize what's going on, that there is something going on between him and Endoro. He was the first one to discover that he had a twin, and the message that he received was two must become one, and he misinterpreted that message and what it meant in the beginning. But after a certain incident in the book, he realized that what it really meant, that the two of them as separate entities had to come together as one person. And by them coming together, not only would they be one person, the people that they led would become one person as well. Which leads me to the other reason that the other detail behind the story is that I wanted Meji to be a origin story. When you look at most cultures and you ask them how they came to be, most of them will have a story that they tell you, and they'll tell you about particular people who either because of circumstances or because of a task or because they were divinely selected, ended up becoming the founders of their culture and their civilization. And my ideal of Meji was that when you went to a person from this culture that resulted between Obaseki and Endoro becoming one person and their people becoming one people, and you asked them how they came to be, they would tell you this story. they would tell you the story of Meji. Um, Meji was never meant to be a series. It was never meant to be something that there were sequels to it. It was basically meant to be a singular story. It was just meant to be this one story told in a certain way. But as you notice, it was released as two books, and that was because at the time this was my very first book. I was a brand new indie author, and the advice that I got from other people who were indie authors was that you don't want to you don't want a 500-page book to be your first book. You want to split the book in half. You want to have like two books. That way, people will be more likely to buy it because a lot of people don't want to commit that much time to reading a 500-page book by somebody that they never heard of before. And so that's why there was a Meji book 1 and a Meji book 2. However, since that time, as some of you may already know, a few years ago I decided to combine the books into one book the way it was actually meant to be released. So if you haven't read Meji yet and you don't mind the spoilers that you just heard, you can pick Meji up as the one volume as it was meant to be released. And I was really happy to be able to do it that way because that was the way I always wanted it to be experienced. I'm going to put in my comment section in just a minute here. Copy the link here. And go back to my video here. I'm going to drop the link to Meji for anyone that wants to check out the book that hasn't checked it out yet, or for anyone who actually wants to pick up the special edition if you already have the other books, so you can take a look at it. So basically that's it. That's what was I thinking about Meji. I don't. If anybody has any questions, I'll hang around for a couple of minutes to see if anybody posts any comments or has any questions about that. I know that there's a delay. I know that there's a delay when it comes to this kind of thing, so I'll wait for a few minutes. But the next book that we'll be discussing will be Changa Safari. Changa Safari was my second novel after Meji. And it's actually a complete series. It's actually the first book and probably the only book that I've written and completed an entire series of it. And I had a different ideal and a different concept when I wrote that book. And when I do the second one, I will talk about it. So hey guys, Milton Davis. Hope you enjoyed it. If you missed it, we'll have the video available on YouTube pretty soon. So hey, y'all take care. Peace.